Hi, and welcome back to our podcast, The Blend Effect.
I'm Radhika.
And I'm Sayli, and we are here back today with another topic, which is
fitting in with our Indian friends who are from India.
Yeah, so as usual, we're talking about this because we have to fit in.
Yes.
Because we're not from India.
Yes.
So we have to make an extra effort to do so.
That's right. And then with both of us being born and raised in North America, we try to find different topics every week that we can sort of talk about and, sort of delve in on our experiences growing up here. And so this week we thought we would talk about fitting in with our Indian friends who are actually from India.
Yeah. Or maybe we should have called this episode Imposter Syndrome.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because we have been raised so Indian, right? And growing up, we were often made fun of, at least I was, and I think from our discussions, even you were, where our peers who were very American would make fun of us almost for being too Indian or say something like, oh, you're such an auntie or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so we grew up with this sense of identity because the only people who were surrounding us were essentially people like us who were Americans or like straight up Americans who were not Indian.
Right.
And so we would grow up with this, almost people making fun of us or just saying, complimenting or commenting even, that we were very Indian. So I think my identity was very tied to being very Indian growing up.
Right.
And then all of a sudden there was this huge shift in our maybe post-college years where there were so many of you that came here from India who migrated over, and all of a sudden we weren't the Indian ones anymore.
That's right. Yeah. Right? No, that's absolutely so true. And, these were people that we then sort of started to hang out with, become friends with, whether it was through marriage or coincidentally or just through like other activities. And then all of a sudden, I know I felt like, oh, I kind of can fit in.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say fit in kind of, because there is this little caveat, which is the whole point of this whole episode of where there are some instances where when I look at my friends who were born and raised in India and now have settled here, I feel like sometimes I can fit in very well, but there are still those times where I'm like, oh.
I don't necessarily connect with not that I don't connect with it, but I cannot say that I understand the experiences that they talk about because we simply weren't there.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
And sometimes that sucks.
Yeah. It does. But I will say it is such a refreshing change to have so many Indians around us, particularly living, where we live.
Right.
Because I think, as we've mentioned on numerous episodes before, we all, we grew up with like nobody, right? Like no Indians around us. So on top of it, to have people who were born and raised in India be here and be a part of their circles, it's nice.
It is nice.
Kind of a different connection. Right. It's very refreshing. And it's almost, to me, sometimes like still being able to like hang out with my parents, but with people who are younger
and more from our generation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. It is funny because I do find that there are times where I don't think about it, right? I'm just hanging out and it just is, and they're just another person and we're just other people and it's fine. But there's definitely times when I feel like they'll be talking about their childhood experiences or they'll be doing something which is very traditional maybe.
Yeah.
And I don't do those things.
Right.
For example, as a wife, I'm not in the kitchen every single day cooking.
Right.
I'm just not. But I do see that a lot of our friends maybe are, or their husbands are helping out or whatever it is, but they do still have this concept of, we're eating at home, we're cooking at home almost every single day. They're cooking for their children. And I think I try to do my best to do that as well because we want the best for our families and children. But I can't necessarily say that I'm opposed to maybe once in a while ordering out or once in a while being like, you know what, the kid can just eat a pouch.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. Yeah. So I think with a lot of our friend circle, my experience has actually been a little bit different where, for me, maybe it's not that aspect. In fact, sometimes I find that I'm the more person who wants to experiment with like different like Indian recipes. And some of them are like, oh yeah, like there's so much food here. Maybe we can just like order out or order in or whatever. But there's other things that I feel, you're talking about kind of the being traditional part. Like sometimes I feel that I'm the more traditional one in some senses. Like I think we've talked about, like for example, if you look at certain festivals, right? Like, like having, celebrating like Bornla, right? Or, doing like a Manga or something. Like I've talked to some of our friends who were born and raised in India and they're like, I don't even know what that is. And I was like, seriously?
Yeah.
But then it made me realize it's because I think we grew up Indian with what our parents' ideas of India were, and those were kind of frozen in time when they left.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? And now our generation, or people from our generation who are now coming from India, they grew up in a different India, and when they were growing up, our parents had already left.
Right.
So some of the, I don't know if traditional is the right word, but some of the views that like our parents kind of put on us or raised us with, or some of those values, those are not necessarily the values that these people have grown up with.
I think what it is that we are traditional in the sense that we are carrying the traditions that our parents came here with. But when I say traditional, I'm talking about the day-to-day Indianness or being Indian on a day-to-day degree. In the 90s and the 2000s and the, and so on and so forth. I don't think I connect to that because our parents didn't raise us that way. Right? Because we were stuck in retro traditional India. So I guess to differentiate between what you and I are saying, I think that we are more retro traditional. Satjad gharat, ase kapde ghalaयचे, काही गोष्टी अशा अशा नाही करायच्या. These are the traditional things that our parents kind of imposed on us, or certain functions celebrate करायचे, those kind of things. But I think when I'm saying maybe traditional isn't the right word, but the more Indian way of living on a daily basis, that is something people from India do better.
Right.
That I don't connect with.
Right. But like I kind of do agree on that point because you're talking about like, the pouches, right? So I know that I've introduced a lot of my friends from India to a lot of like frozen foods, right? And yes, I know, it's like not always healthy, but there is so much available. So sometimes if you're like stressed and you're trying to get through the day, it's okay to like go grab something frozen and like put it in the oven or something. But they may be, again, like you said,
a little bit
we're
hesitant.
not raised that way. We're not familiar. Oh, really? Like you get these items. So yes, I completely see what you're saying on that.
Somewhere in the middle, because I still do try to cook for my daughter as much as I can. And then of course I'll have my friends that are just not Indian at all. And they're like, we just steam vegetables from a frozen pack of vegetables. And then our kid's just eating steamed broccoli, So, or even when my kid was very, very little, when we started purees. There were people who didn't even want to do that. Right? So in that sense, I think we're more Indian, where I'm like, okay, well, I can at least steam and puree a vegetable. As opposed to people being like, oh no, we're just buying bottles because we don't have the patience to steam and then like blend it or whatever. So I think in that sense, we're more Indian. But in many other senses, I think we're somewhere in the middle because of which we don't fit in here and we don't fit in there. So we're kind of our own category. Right?
No, I always say this, and I've had people say this to me, is I feel like आपलं कुठेतरी अर्धवट, or rather आपण कुठेतरी मध्ये आहोत, but I don't know where that मध्ये exactly is. I don't know exactly what
I almost wonder if my identity crisis happened in my 20s and not when I was younger, because when I was younger, I thought I had an identity. My identity was an American who's very Indian. And then I, started hanging out with Indians, and then I realized, oh, I'm not very Indian. And so then I was like, oh my gosh, what's my identity then?
What have been some of the, I guess, like beauty of having friends like from that circle, which obviously we didn't have growing up, and what have been, well, I mean, I know we talked a little bit about some of the challenges, but anything else you want to kind of like talk about?
I don't know what you're getting at, but I did want to bring up one thing, which is I feel like because we were born and raised in America, a lot of the auntie uncle generation doesn't take us seriously. I feel like that. But if we have our friends from India who are the same age, somehow I have noticed over the past 10 years that they are taken more seriously, or they're treated more like adults than we are. Somehow I feel like we are still treated like children no matter how old we get. Do you experience that?
Yes, I was actually going to say I definitely feel like that too. And sometimes I feel like some of the auntie uncles like from our generation, sometimes I feel like they're less hesitant to like say something to us. And then if we reply back, it's almost like, oh, you know what, like we talked back. But I have found that with some of my friends who were born and raised in India, they wouldn't even go and...
They wouldn't even say anything.
Exactly, to them. And I mean, that I think goes both ways, right? Like the auntie and the uncle wouldn't even bother saying anything to them.
In the first place.
But to me, I feel like, or maybe even to you, I feel like it's an easier target.
Somehow, and I don't know why that is, and it really bothers me because I just feel like I have had people scold me for something, and I'm just like, whoa, I'm an adult. Like, are you really just yelling at me right now for what? You know? I do find that very odd, and I do find exactly what you said, where they don't necessarily do the same with
Right.
our counterparts. So
Right.
I don't know why that is, but
Yeah.
it's very odd.
Yeah. Yes, I think for me, one of the beauty of, having this sort of, I want to say newly discovered friend circle, because it's really been more in the last 10 to 12 years that I've sort of discovered this group of people that I'm now more comfortable hanging out with. I think one of the beauties is that we do kind of get the best of both worlds, right? Because we have our, North American friends who, whether they're Indian, born and raised here, or whether they're actually, American. But we also have this group of friends, right? So it's like, I feel like for our children and for our families and for us, it really is the best of both worlds, because we get to experience some of their Indian values and, try to live and understand those. But we also have our friends who have.
But I think the difference, and again, coming back to the main topic, which is, okay, we have the best of both worlds. We have these experiences. We've had it for our whole life, really. But are we really fitting in is the real question. I think when it comes to our children, they have the ability to experience these things, which is great, but you also have to look at their peers. All their peers are exactly like them. Marathi, born and raised in America.
Right.
Or some sort of that.
Right.
We didn't have that necessarily.
Right.
Right? So for our kids, when they grow up, they're going to have their set of experiences and they're going to have their community, and it's preset for them because we're all here. But that wasn't the experience that we had.
Right.
So really it comes down to, okay, we have these friends and we're having a great time with them, no doubt. And we have our North American friends and we have our Indian friends, and we're kind of living our everyday lives without really thinking about it. But the question is, do we feel like we're really fitting in, or do we feel like imposters sometimes when you're really thinking about it? And then the second question is, how are we perceived?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's interesting about, like the fitting in part. So I think sometimes, just as a gender, just as a gappa martana vagare, I think it's fine, we feel like, we can fit in. But as you said, when they're talking about, like an experience, from their childhood or from their undergrad days or something, and I was like, okay, like, you know what, like my college was not like this at all. I cannot relate to this, right? But, or even sometimes I remember, like we certainly grew up watching, Marathi nataks and, even Marathi movies, but there are still some Marathi movies which, my husband and his friends can get together and watch, and that level of Marathi, I might not get the context on a lot of things.
It's interesting that you say that, because there's also different dialects of Marathi, or different, and now this is suddenly opening a plethora of like topics in my head. But I've definitely watched movies where they're speaking a different dialect or a different accent of Marathi, and I'm just like, wow, they're speaking Marathi, but I have no idea what they're saying.
Right?
Yeah. Has that happened to you?
Yeah, no, exactly. I was going to say whether it was, in some movie or some video on YouTube or something like that, right? Or sometimes there's, even now, there's a lot of, comedians, right? And then, a lot of our friends will say, oh, here, you know what, like, let's sit and watch this. And I'm like, I can't relate to this at all. I don't even understand what they're saying. So this is not,
Even though they're speaking Marathi.
Right, exactly.
And then another thing that I've noticed on the more artistic side, where we're more performative, right? We, at the Mi Ani Maza Naura, we met doing natak. And so a lot of times when I would go out and try out for, audition for natak roles, or even just think about natak, काय करायचं, कसं करायचं, I feel like we're typecasted a lot. At least I was. Of course, we're able to do nataks which are generic, but when it really came down to, ashit vyakti havi or whatever, there was a lot of times where people were like, oh, you're too American for this, even though I spoke perfect Marathi.
Right. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it's just those preconceived notions of, तू अमेरिकन आहेस, तुझं थोडासा ॲक्सेंट ऑफ असेल, अगदी मराठी नसेल, जरी कितीही मराठी असलो तरी. But I do find that we were oftentimes sidelined because, you won't get the essence of what it is to be Indian or whatever it is. So that used to bother me a lot, because I was like, you can teach me. Yeah. If you're a good director, you can teach me how to do that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So those kind of things bothered me a lot often. So I don't know. For me, I think that on a daily basis, yes, we just live our lives because everybody's just a person at the end of the day. But there are times where sometimes I feel like maybe an imposter at times. Because I don't necessarily always get what's going on, or I don't know how to deal with the way people speak. Sometimes.
Agreed.
They might be like aggressive, but it's not perceived as aggressive by other people, but it's perceived as aggressive by me. Or tomre marna. Right? Especially if you're surrounded by Punekars. They, or even just Marathi loka khub tomre marta. So just having to listen to those tomre and let them roll off your back and be like, haha, that was funny, or just letting it go.
No, I I like completely agree, and I you know, a lot of times some of our friends or, you know, my husband has said to me, oh, you know, he's like, it's like not a big deal, you know, he's like, they probably didn't mean it in that way. I'm like, but it clearly came out
But
in that
I don't
way.
know how to perceive that. You
So
know?
I think आपल्याला to accept that is hard. I think for me, this is actually really funny, and this is kind of stepping away from the Marathi part a bit. So a lot of, you know, some of our friends who are born and brought up in India are actually not all Marathi, right? They're from different parts of India. And, you know, I remember, you know, like when I first got married, all these people would sit, you know, would, you know, hang out, and, you know, everybody would speak in Hindi, right? And growing up, right? And this is funny, right? So growing up, of course, like I watched Bollywood movies, although we watched them like with subtitles. So there was a few, you know, like prominent Hindi dialogues, which of course I could understood. But if someone was, you know, conversing like for an hour straight, a lot of it would just go over my head when, you know, when I first met some of these friends. And then there were times where I'm like, okay, like this is just pointless hanging out with these people because like I don't understand, like, you know what, like they're not speaking in English and I don't really expect them to for me. And it was too much. But over the years, it actually made me curious. And then I got to this point where I'm like, okay, you know what? Like I might not be able to learn how to speak Hindi, but I'm like, please speak to me in Hindi so at least mara thoda jasta samjhayla lage. So I took it as, you know, kind of like a learning curve. And now, you know, before sometimes, you know, my husband would have to say to his friends, okay, you know what? Like she really doesn't understand, you know, she won't be able to understand this. But now I've come to this point where it's okay, I do understand and please continue to speak to me in Hindi. So
I think that's really funny that you bring that up because definitely as a child, there was that experience. I think I'm a little bit more fluent in understanding languages because I can definitely understand Gujarati and Hindi and Marathi all the same. But when it comes to speaking, I'm just like...
right. No, but it's just, you know, it was like, for me, that was the imposter part you were talking about, where I kind of felt like, okay, maybe I don't really fit in.
Do I pretend to fit in?
Right.
Do I pretend to understand?
Right, exactly. But then later, as I then, you know, met more people who were born and raised in India, and then, of course, I could connect more with those folks who are Marathi because of the common language. But I do think, I do have friends who are Marathi or, you know, Indians who were born and raised here and don't speak their language. So त्यांना ह्या लोकांशी काहीच connect करता येत नाही.
That's
which
true.
I think is cool that we can do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that is really interesting that I have a question for people who are Marathi as well, but grew up in India, however, not in Maharashtra. Do you guys feel the same way? So for the people who grew up in somewhere in North India or somewhere else, I just recently, 2 days ago, had a conversation with a friend of mine who grew up, I'm not sure where she grew up, but it was not in Maharashtra, I think Bangalore.
Okay.
तर मला हा प्रश्न पडला कारण ती पण बोलत होती त्याबद्दल. She was like, you know, I didn't grow up in Maharashtra, so my parents essentially had to do all the same efforts that your parents did. It was just maybe not as much because we were still in the same country.
Right.
So, you know, I would be really interested to hear about, do people who grew up outside of Maharashtra but still in India have the same experience as us?
Right.
Do you still feel like an imposter or do you fit in? And the other thing I would be really interested to hear about is how are we North Americans perceived by our Indian friends? Do you just see us as one of your own, or is there sort of that inkling or idea of, oh, you know, we're the same, but you are different?
Right. Well, I think ki baryaच लोकांना, Sayli, I know that after they've met you and me, certainly at common events or whatnot, I think a lot of people are just surprised. Ki, oh, you know, like, I mean, many a times the first words that come out of anybody's mouth are, oh, you know, you're born and brought up here. Oh, but tumhi Marathi खूप चांगलं बोलता. Or, you know, oh, you know, like, you're really attached to your culture, which, you know, even we were not this much, or this is really impressive, or this is how we strive for our children to be brought up. But the
fact that they're making these comments in itself sets us apart from who they are, right?
Exactly.
They're distinguishing, hey, you're not one of us.
Right, exactly.
Not in a bad way. In a good way. Go but, you know, you wouldn't go up to somebody who grew up in Pune and be like, "Arey wah, kiti chhan Marathi bolta." No one's going to say that.
Right. But a lot of that, I think, is just based on misconceptions about people from abroad, right?
Yeah.
So
well, it would be really interesting to hear how we are perceived as outsiders. Are we successfully impostoring, or are we sadly impostoring?
Yes. Well, as always, good discussion.
Good discussion.
Yes.
And it was great to have this conversation. We will be back with another episode at some point.
Yes, for sure. As always, guys, like, share, subscribe, and we will see you guys next time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.